Second Timothy 2:2, I think, is the primary strategy for the church, or should be still today. And the things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also be qualified to teach others. This, my favorite way of restating that process is making disciples who make disciples. I believe this is the only way that we'll ever be able to have any effectiveness in pursuing Jesus's great commission that he gave to the apostles and to us. Matthew 28:18 and 19 and even 20 come to my mind, where he says, go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe everything I have commanded you. And I will be with you to the end of the age. Okay, how do you do that? Here is at least one way. And I would even say the primary way. I left you with the question of what, really, this is not how I said it, but the question is, what are you going to do about this in your own personal life? I have this burn in for getting anybody who will listen to me, who has anything to do with leading a church, that ought to be the principal strategy for the church. It's what the outcome we're truly after is disciples who make disciples. And this may sound like a bunny trail, but I think it is very germane to what we're talking about. Let's talk about when we say disciples, what does that look like? My experience and my my opinion at this point in life is that disciple making looks different from one person to the next. To what are we discipling them? Now that is unchangeable. We're discipling them, and by the way, remember, disciple is a derivative of discipline. And discipline, please don't mistake discipline for punishment, because they're not the same. Discipline is training toward a specific end. And sometimes discipline is not fun. In fact, the Hebrew writer says, no discipline is pleasant at the time, but painful later on. However, it produces a fruit of righteousness and peace. Well, I, in my own life, have experienced that discipline is often not fun. It in fact, it can be and often is painful. All right, so now we are discipling them. We're teaching them. They are learning with us toward what? Toward conforming to the likeness and nature of Jesus. Be more and more like Jesus. That our heart and our mind, our decision making would be more and more and more like Jesus's. I can't think of a more challenging proposition. Now, here's the thing. When you're working in a field of learning and teaching, this is a field of process. There are occasionally events where the light comes on and the student says, oh, but the truth is, it's more, I believe it was Isaiah the prophet that said, line upon line, precept upon precept. It's just this process of learning and learning more and learning more and learning. And so one of my goals is to never stop learning. The older I get, the more I realize the vast universe of things I don't know. And I don't have a misguided goal that I'm gonna master the world. I'm gonna totally get it. I don't think so. For me, part of the challenge is figuring things out better and better and better, and especially in terms of I want to be more like Jesus. I know this is kind of going every direction, but Paul writes in Philippians that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion until that day. And that day is until you're done and life ends for you, whether that's through death or the return of Jesus. Okay, I want to be in all the way, all in for that until that day comes. And I want to participate with God. I want to partner with him as he brings to completion what he began in me. Okay. Good night. How do I get back to where I started? Well, just a jump. When you think about making disciples, you better have objectives in view. And broadest of all, most important of all objectives is that I and they, which is poor syntax, they and I will become more and more like Jesus. If you look at the New Testament through the lens of this as the prime objective, for me, it changes things. It creates a more a clearer picture of what God is doing in the world through his people, of whom I am one. Now, when Jesus said, make disciples, he just left it at that. Now, I look at my experience with making disciples, and I can see that this, because it's a process, I would almost even say there are people who are pre-disciple. A friend of mine introduced me to the idea that what I had traditionally had heard and said, lost people, they are the not yet converted people. You can't be a Calvinist and believe that, but since I'm not, it fits with me that there are people who are not yet converted. And I believe that for a lot of them, it's not even not yet converted, they're not yet convinced. All right, what's my best way of convincing those? Well, I would put them in the pre-disciple category. I can come on I can come on with all kinds of data, right? I mean, I can memorize Josh McDowell's books and spit out the data. It's valid. But there are a lot of people that, you know what, it's not the data that leaves them unconvinced. It's not the concept of God at work in the world that they're not convinced of. What's holding them back is not a problem of data. I believe this to be true of not everybody, but a lot. and maybe even in our culture, most people who are unconvinced, or not yet convinced, isn't the data issue. It's their experience with Christians who have not yet been converted. That's pretty harsh. I also think is absolutely true. I often encounter people like Gandhi, who it is said that he once said, I love your Jesus. I just don't like very many Christians. Or maybe the way he said it was, I found them to not be very much like him. The point I'm trying to make is, for most people, now there are exceptions to this, and I'm very glad there are exceptions. But for most of us, if you're dealing with a not yet convinced person, then they're probably going to become more and more convinced by their relationship with you and how authentic it seems it is to them. So here's my point. Don't start where you are. Start where they are. In human relations, you have to factor in where you are. But if you start where you are in your relationship with other people, there's always a bumpy road. There's always a bumpy road with relationships anyway, but this is especially bumpy. Don't start with where you are. Start with where they are. So there is the not yet convinced. There are those these are more than interested. They're seeking. Okay. And then there are those who are making a decision to accept Christ on his terms and making choices to follow him. We often just think of discipleship over here on they are making choices to follow him. That is discipleship. But I have experienced that people on the other side of that, if there's a line, wherever that comes, they are or can be, and it totally depends on the condition of their heart. They may be in stages of what might be considered pre-discipleship, but my encounters with them can influence them. I don't get to push or shove or drag anybody into discipleship. If that's going to happen, it's going to be the Holy Spirit doing that, not me. My experience is I get to influence people. I get to appeal to their heart and their mind on the basis of the truth about God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, his family. The things you have heard me say in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to reliable people who will also teach others. They'll be qualified to teach others. That's all about disciples who make disciples. Now, I believe people, immature disciples can do this. But one of the motivations I have for making the effort to partner with God to become more and more mature is I can guide people where I have been more effectively than trying to guide them where I've never been. In other words, if I'm going to make disciples who make disciples, one of my motivations is to grow more deeply devoted to Christ myself so that I can appeal to them and influence them toward deepening devotion. Well, I think I've milked that cow. There's nothing left. I'll see you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.